Good morning, YouTube. It is a pretty nice Tuesday morning, a little overcast, and I've decided I'm going to go ahead and get started on actually building the electric fence that I'm going to be using this summer. Now, before we get started, I want to let everybody know I'm doing this in a new format to try to teach everybody how to do it, or at least how not to do it if I do it wrong. So there's going to be some supplies that you need first. First and foremost, the most important thing you're going to need for an electric fence is an energizer. And that's this. Now, this is one of two types of energizers you can usually get. Mine is AC powered, so that means it's going to run off of wall power. The other type you could get is a solar powered energizer. Now, they do tend to be a lot more expensive than what a AC powered one is, because your solar powered energizers would typically come with a solar panel, a battery, and the actual energizer that you're going to hook your fence into. So you could usually pay almost twice for a solar powered energizer, depending on the brand, than what you would an AC powered one. So that's the very first supply. Obviously, you're going to need T-posts. Now, with electric fences, you can go, I think, up to 40 feet between posts as you're running your wire. So I have in my garden right now 8 T-posts. I have 4 up here, which you'll see long term, because I'm gonna be creating like a gate area for me to be able to get in and out with some of my heavier equipment, like my mower, my tiller, things like that if necessary. So you'll need that. You will need to have insulators, because you can't just wrap an electric wire around your T-post and expect it to work. They will ground out your fence, and it won't work. It'll be a waste of your time. So I've got 2 different types of insulators. I have this longer one, which will attach to the T-post, and this is going to be on corners. So that'll be where I move to a different side. My other one is just a standard flat one. That's going to be on my straight runs, so that I can keep my electric wire in place. You want to make sure, again, that you're not putting the wire right on the metal T-post, because it will ground out. Now, if you're just building a standard wire fence but not energizing it, yeah, you can do that. That's not a big deal. But if you're going electric, you cannot do that. Next on our list of necessary items is a ground rod clamp. Now, the ground rod clamp is just how I'm going to attach my grounding wire to the grounding rod. You could just wrap the wire around and I'm sure it would work. But for the sake of making sure that it works right, I'm using a clamp. I have next, I don't know what the actual item is called, but I call it a T-post hammer. And so what this will do with my grounding rod and the T-post is it's going to allow you to hammer them down into the ground, because you can't just push those down very easily. A rubber mount would probably work, but this weighs about 30 pounds, so this works the best. Now, looking at my T-post here, you've noticed that I've got a few things attached to it. I am going to have a gate in the electric fence. It's not going to be anything special, but I need to be able to get in and out of the garden. So I have gate hooks, and I don't remember what these are called, but these will allow me to connect my hook just like that. And that way I can have it closed up in the evenings while my electric fence is running. Now, mind you, your wire is going to be attached at this end down here. So if the energizer is on and you disconnect it from the fence, you're grounded out. You no longer have a complete circuit, so it's not going to work. But I would still recommend shutting off the energizer before you go playing around. Last 2 items we're going to need, other than wire cutters, you need a pair of wire cutters, a decent pair. I've got a pair of micro wire cutters. They work. Not great, but they're going to suffice. You're also going to need galvanized steel wire. Now, this is galvanized electric fence wire. It's 14 gauge. This spool has about 1/4 of a mile of wire on it. And this is going to be my electric fence. Now you probably notice I have a bar in the middle of it. It is a small piece of rebar. I would very highly recommend either picking up a piece, finding something just as strong to use, because while this spool does not look very big, this weighs probably about 50 pounds. Well, maybe not quite 50 pounds, probably around 30, but it's still very heavy. So lifting this up and down is going to give you a good little workout. And the last thing you need is grounding wire, or not grounding wire, but insulated cable. Now this insulated cable is going to run from my Energizer to my fence and to my grounding rod. And so I need to make sure that it can't be grounded out easily, because this wire will be in contact with the ground because of where my Energizer is going to be, most likely. So I have here about 200 feet of that. All in all the supplies I got, including the tools, I've got about, I'd say $300 to $500 worth of stuff here. So building an electric fence is not a cheap thing to do. You can go with more cost-effective alternatives, especially if it's going to be more of a temporary thing versus a potentially permanent thing. Premier One does portable fencing. There's a few other companies out there. I'm not sure what they charge, but they're also alternatives. They do some pretty good work. You'll see them on channels like I've seen Justin Rhodes has some. I know that the Haulers have some. There's a couple other channels. I just can't remember. I think Jess at Roots and Refuge has some too. But I wanted to go with a more permanent setup because this is going to long-term be my garden. So we are going to get started. I've already done some basic prep work. I have my gate hooks and everything put into place already. I've got one insulator in place on my corner post, so all I got to do is just start my wire. And then what's going to be happening as I go is I'm going to attach my wire, move to the next one, attach an insulator, put my wire on, move to the next pole, put another insulator. And the reason I'm doing that is my garden sits at an angle in some places. And if you look behind me, you could probably see that. So my insulators are not always going to be in the exact same spots on every T-post, so that I can try to keep the wire as straight as possible. Because again, this fence is being built to keep deer out, and deer are very prolific jumpers. So I don't want them to be able to get to a low spot in the fence and jump over that easily. I've got a modification I'm going to do to the fence long term, which will kind of make it look more like a prison fence, but that's down the line. Now this would probably be a lot easier if I had somebody else here helping me, but I don't have that luxury. But if you have the luxury, get help. So like I said just a little bit ago, this is going to be a corner. So all I'm going to do is stake my wire in, and then I'm just going to wrap it around. It also helps if you have a decent pair of gloves on, because this is going to hurt if I snap myself with the wire. Alright, so I'm down to my next T-post, and so I want to show you how these insulators attach, since I didn't show you with the first ones. Now, when we look at it, we'll see that it is in the shape of a T-post. You've got your T here, and then these will obviously hook on. So what I'm going to do with this insulator, you can't see, but there's a little T right here. I'm going to take this piece, and I'm just going to put it right flat against it. And then I'm just going to snake my insulator around until I get it snapped on. The other way of doing it is I can take this piece, put it flat against the T-post, and this is actually the easier way of doing it. Now when we look at it, this is going nowhere. So obviously that's taken care of now. And even the corner pieces, they snap in just the same way. And you can probably see me struggling with the weight of this. This stuff is very heavy. All right, so the next piece I'm gonna need is just another corner. Kind of hard with gloves on, not gonna lie. Nope, don't you do it. The wire is very highly tensioned on the spool, so if it gets off the spool, it's gonna suck. Okay, so I am at the last post in the run. So what I'm gonna have to do is and it's gonna be a little wasteful, but I don't know a better way to do it. I'm gonna have to cut my electric wire a little bit on the long side so that I can pull it nice and tight as I'm attaching it to this. Or not to this particular piece, but as I'm attaching it to this handle. Because I want it to be, it's not going to be as tight as what you'll have around the rest of the run, for obvious reasons. But I want it to be as tight as possible, so I'm going to pull it a little long and snake it through here while this hook is in place. And I'm going to see if I can get a nice strong attachment. The good news is the place where my little gate area is going to be is not a high traffic area for deer. So that's, you know, a win on my part, I guess. So before the rain makes me stop, I pulled this line as tight as I possibly could. And so now, it takes a little bit of muscle, but I can unhook the wire and then retension it. Now, because this gate post thing has a rubber washer and then another metal piece going through it, I should be okay in terms of grounding. This is designed to not ground out the way it is, so hopefully it works fine. Now the final thing I want to show you for the first strand, and really all strands, is when we look right here, we'll see that I have this wrapped several times. That'll make sure that this doesn't release. And for extra safety, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shorten this a little bit. I'm just gonna do another loop through here just to make sure it's safe. So that's the end of strand number 1. What I've got to do now is run my other 3 strands basically the same way I just did them, or basically the same way I just did strand number 1. And from there, what I'm going to do is once I'm done running all the strands, I'm going to show you how I hook up the actual energizer to the fence. One thing I do want to talk to you guys about, and it was a piece of supply I didn't mention earlier. When you're setting up an electric fence, buy one of these. They're just electric fence warning signs. Set these up if your fence is going to be anywhere near public access. Now, I'm 100% on private property, so nobody should come around. But if there's anything I've learned over the years, it's that let's not trust the intelligence of our fellow human beings and make sure that there's a warning sign up. I don't get a lot of visitors, so I'm not worried about it, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Okay, so now my electric fence, or at least the fence itself, is put up. All my strands are strung, and I have all my gate handles put in place. Now, before we get on to the next part, I just want to remind everybody, over time, even though it is wire, steel wire, it is going to stretch, especially with the corners. The tension will pull your corners in a little bit. So what you're going to want to do periodically, if you've got your fence in, you know, a square like mine is, go out every few days and just make sure that nothing has sagged too much to where it's touching another line or to where it's touching the ground. If you're in an area where there is grass, make sure you keep the grass below the electric fence wire, or that's going to potentially ground it out. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pull out my extension cord, and I'm going to bring it around to where my Energizer is going to be set up, and I'm going to show you what to do from there. So what I have here is just a 100-foot outdoor rated extension cord. Remember, I'm using an AC powered Energizer, so I won't be able to run it off solar, so I'm going to need an electrical outlet. Now my nearest outlet is on my front deck, so this cable is going to get snaked a little bit. Now for choosing placement of where your Energizer is going to go, you have a couple of options. If you have any covered shed areas that have a power outlet, great place to put them, because you don't want your Energizer getting wet if it's just an AC powered one. If you don't have the option for that, what you can do is you can put the Energizer on like a pole and put something over it that's going to protect it from the elements. And I'll show you that once I get there. But first, I'm gonna go snake my cable, and then I'll be back to set up the Energizer. Alright, so I have my electrical cable run. Again, if I didn't already say, make sure it is an outdoor rated electrical cable, because this thing is going to be exposed to the elements and we don't want to risk any kind of short outs anywhere. Luckily, I'm plugged into an outlet that will trip its own personal breaker. I don't remember what it's called, but I'm plugged into an outlet that'll trigger its own personal breaker if there's a surge. So if somehow the integrity of the extension cord is compromised, it shouldn't cause a fire, but do it at your own risk. Alright, the next step in what we have to do, now that the Energizer is on a post, I've got an extension cable ready, we have to prep the grounding rod. Now a lot of you will probably just wrap your cable around the grounding wire, and that might be okay, but I've got a clamp that's going to hold it on. You can get these clamps for like $8 at Tractor Supply. Don't know where my normal screwdriver is, so I'm just using the chuck key for my chainsaw. So what I'm going to do is I am just ever so slightly going to loosen this top opening right here, and that's where my grounding wire is going to go in. With your grounding wire, I'm going to use insulated cable, so I'm going to need to cut a little bit of this top piece off so that it could go in my grounding rod. Now I don't know where my wire stripper is, but any old pocket knife will be more than enough. We don't want to strip a ton off, just enough. So I am taking about, say, 1/4 of an inch off of it, so that I can make sure it can get a nice solid connection to my wire. Alright, so I moved that. So now I'm just going to insert my wire down into it like this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this over to where I'm going to drive it into the ground, and I'm going to drive it into the ground. Slight problem. The rod's not all the way in the ground. I really hope that's not going to impact anything. Otherwise, I'm going to need other tools. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my grounding wire, and we'll go from there. All right, I know it's been a few days, wardrobe change, but we're going to finish up the electric fence. So all I have to do at this point is hook up my ground wire and hook up my hot wire. I'm good. A couple tools you're going to need for this part. You're going to need wire strippers and a wire cutter. I would recommend having a wire cutter, probably a lot heavier duty than either of these, but they'll work. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to terminate my ground wire, because I've already got the ground rod in the ground. Terminate it, going to hook it up there, and then I'm going to run the hot wire from the fence to the Energizer. Now you'll probably notice, and I'm pretty sure I've said this already, but if I haven't, I've got a bucket over my Energizer because it's just exposed. And I have the bucket attached with a wire just to keep it in place in case I get some wind. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, because I plugged it in just to make sure it works, So I'm gonna unplug my Energizer. That way I don't accidentally shock myself with anything. So you'll remember that I had strung my ground wire already. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna terminate it with a little bit of slack just to make sure that I could reach that. Now right here, this green piece that I'm screwing out a little bit, this is the ground. Now I'm gonna take this green piece off all the way so you can fully see this terminal. You see that I got a few openings on the top and on the bottom. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna strip a little bit off this cable and I'm just gonna slot it right in here. And then when I do my hot wire on the actual fence, do the same thing. All right, so I've stripped just enough of it to where I can get it in here. So I'm gonna slot it in. Okay, that's not gonna work. Okay, I have my wire cut. Got about 6-8 feet here. So what I'm gonna do is one end I'm just gonna go ahead and put in the Energizer. It's not plugged in, so I'm not worried. And then I'm gonna take it and basically just wrap it around the existing wire that I've got here, which that will complete my circuit. And then I'll have a live fence. All right, so now this time, instead of plugging into my ground, I'm gonna plug into the actual fence part, which if you're using American Farm Works, it's the red outlet. So I'm gonna set my red cap there. Now this wire is a smaller gauge than what my grounding wire is, so it should be a little bit more malleable to what I'm trying to do. So all I'm doing is I just want it in contact with this centerpiece. I can put my cap back on. Now I do want to warn you guys on something. Don't jump the gun and plug it into power until your wire is done. Otherwise, you're gonna have a bad time. All right, so now I have my hot wire plugged into my Energizer. The next thing I want to do is run it onto the actual fence. This needs to be in contact with the fence for me to make a complete circuit and actually pass power through the wire. So what I'm going to do, just so you know, try not to get hurt by my wire. I'm going to take it from this top run. Now it's already in contact with here. So what I'm gonna do, and I don't want to futz with this wire too much because then it could mess with the whole circuit. All I'm gonna do is I am just gonna take the wire I'm attaching to it, and I'm just gonna wrap it around so that I know I have contact. And then for my next strand, I'm gonna do the exact same thing. So I'm gonna take my wire, just like this, and I am going to wrap it around, just making a coil. And then I'm gonna do that for the next 2 strands. So you can see right here, I have quite a bit of excess, so I'm gonna snip it nice and close, and I'm done. All right, now that I have my ground wire, I have my hot wire, that's all set up, All I have to do is plug the Energizer in. And then it's really hard to see because it's daylight, but you'll see a fence okay light right here. That flashes if the fence is okay. So my fence is fine, it's flashing. I can close everything up and I'm good to go. Alright, so before we call it done, I have a couple things that I need to tell you guys about that I have discovered over the 2 weeks it's taken me to get around to finishing this. So, one, be very mindful of where you're putting your T-posts in that are going to hold the wire. The reason I say that is because where I'm at right now, it's a relatively moist soil. And because of that, my T-posts have curved in a little bit. They're leaning in. Now there's a couple reasons for that. One, the wet soil, and two, the amount of tension that I had on the wires initially. So I have had to come out to periodically adjust them. I did completely redo one T-post because that was bent at almost a 45-degree angle. Now second, even though it is galvanized wire, it is going to stretch out over time. So you will need to periodically come out and tighten up your strands, especially for the ones that are relatively close to the ground. The reason behind that is if any of these strands touch the ground, you're going to ground them out. And if you ground them out, what's the point of having a working fence? And I'm talking the whole fence. If just one wire touches the ground, that whole fence grounds out because everything is now in contact in one way or the other. So be very, very careful. I would recommend coming out probably once every week or so. And being that it's a garden, for me, I'm going to be out here on a near daily basis. But I would recommend walking the perimeter of the fence about every week or so and tightening it up as necessary. Right now, 2 of my strands probably need a little love, but I'm going to put those off for a little bit. Now third, and I don't know if I've said this enough, but when you come out to work in the garden or do any kind of maintenance on your fence, make sure it's off first. I've warned you. Don't be stupid. So that's my electric fence. We can see that it's not hard to make one of these. It's just very time consuming. It's a tedious process, especially when you're putting insulators on T-posts. But I've learned a lot in the time it's taken me to set this up. So I hope that you guys have learned how to do this also. If you have any questions about my experiences so far, just go ahead and leave them down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer them honestly. If you got questions about electric fences in general, go ahead and ask them. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert on electric fences, but I know several people who do know quite a bit about them. So if I can't answer a question, I will work to get you an answer. So in the meantime, guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video. I've put a lot of time and effort into it. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit that like button, and most importantly of all, I'll catch you later.